Now, another little thing I have for 1953, I think is very funny. I'm just adding little color touches that might go into the story. Uh, I told you I've always had stars in my eyes. I love movie stars. One girl I was particularly anxious to meet in 1953 was a girl named Marilyn Monroe. And now how was I to meet her and not be murdered by my wife? That was a big problem. So we were going out to the desert for a vacation. We spent several winters near Palm Springs in a place called La Quinta. And Laquinta. And I got a brilliant idea. I went across the street from our office to Esquire and said I would like to do an interview with Marilyn Monroe. And they said, we can't afford your prices. That time Esquire was struggling along, and I said, who said anything about prices? I don't get what you pay me. I just want to be officially designated to do the interview. So we made a big deal, which didn't impress Phyllis at all. It didn't work by stratagem. She said, you went over and arranged all that. I tried to tell her that they had beseeched me. But at any rate, we got out to the coast. Marilyn was working for 20th Century Fox. Harry Brand, the publicity man there, head of publicity man, an old friend of mine. And I told him I wanted to do this piece about Marilyn Monroe for Esquire, and of course he was amused that I worked this all out. I said, well, this afternoon she'll be taking pictures. They were making Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And she said, they're taking stills, she and Jane Russell this afternoon. So come on over, you'll have plenty of time to talk to her. So I went over to the lot, and sure enough, here were these two girls, Jane Russell and Marilyn Monroe, dressed in very little. It was the costume they used in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes with high hats and boys' pants on and little roses in the proper places. You know? And they were posing all afternoon for pictures. And what was interesting while watching was that Jane Russell, the veteran, who had been in about 8 pictures already, was a big star. They had to pose her. Marilyn, who was her first big picture, just fell into a sexy pose by instinct. They didn't have to touch her. She just absolutely naturally assumed the sexiest, most alluring position. It was incredible while they were fiddling around with Miss Russell, changing her legs and her arms and a tilt of her head. Monroe did it as though she had been born to it, which indeed she was. Well, I started talking to her after this thing was finished. I was alone with her as I would be in a crowded subway train. There were agents, musicians, managers, other newspaper men, all crowding around her. She was as nice as she could be. Really a totally nice girl. And I said, I thought I was going to be alone with you for a few minutes. So I said, you got to give me a little time alone. I can't do this story. I must explain to you that Marilyn Monroe was very impressed with me because I was a publisher. She had tremendous leanings toward the intellectual. That's why she ended up marrying Arthur Miller. She wanted to be educated. And she had no education at all. She grew up in an orphan asylum and just was absolutely no education. So we made a date for the next afternoon to have tea together. Phyllis took a dim view of the whole thing. And we were staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And the next morning, about 8:45, the telephone rang. And Phyllis answered it and said, it's your girlfriend. And I said, oh damn, she's breaking the date. She was notoriously unreliable, Marilyn. So I got the phone, sure enough. She said, I've got a terrible cold. I won't be able to see you this afternoon. So I said, oh damn, we're going to the desert early tomorrow morning. I said, there goes the whole interview. Well, I won't be able to do the story. She said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm right at the same hotel you are. I'm upstairs. She said, if you're not afraid of catching my cold, she said, come on up. Well, my arm twisted that way. I was halfway out of the room before I got the phone. Phyllis said, I'll give you 15 minutes. One boy who named Charles Lederer, who was quite a writer on his own, was coming over to have breakfast with the two of us. But she said, Charlie and I will be up in 15 minutes. You've got 15 minutes to be alone with that dame in bed. Not both of us, just Marilyn. So up I went, and there was Marilyn in bed with a little baby blue bed jacket on. And I thought it looked particularly well. And on the bed next to her was a copy of the Modern Library edition of the Essays of Montaigne. Huh. So I said, you didn't have to dress the room up to please me, Marilyn. She said, what are you talking about? I said, that Modern Library book you've got there, that's just to impress me, isn't it? She said, no, why should that impress you? She didn't know I published the Modern Library. I said, well, what are you doing with the Essays of Montaigne? She said, somebody told me every educated girl should know about the Essays of Montaigne. And I said, well, you poor fish, I don't think anybody outside of college students today who have to read the Essays of Montaigne read more than 2 or 3 essays. And I said, you don't have, that's a terrible choice. I said, if you want to read some good Modern Library books, I'll send you a dozen that you'll love. And she said, you mean I don't have to read this? I said, I certainly don't. With this, to my intense delight, she climbed out of bed with that little blue blackjack and a very short little nightgown, and took the Essays of Montaigne, walked across the room, and threw it in the trash basket. She climbed back into bed. Well, I got her to tell me the story about romance with Joe DiMaggio and everything. And sure enough, Phyllis and Charlie Lederer did come. Well, they gave me about 25. By that time, we were very, very good friends. I stayed a friend until she died. She was a lovely, miserably unhappy girl, all the way through.
Did you see her, on different occasions after that?
Yes, well, after she married Arthur Miller, we saw her a couple of times, and we met her at parties and things. She was a fool, Marilyn. The publicity and everything went to her head a little bit, and she wore ridiculous clothes. And the interesting part about this girl, one of the tragedies of show business, is that when she was about 13 years old, she was a ward in some house, and the man of the house raped her. And she was a little girl and hurt her very badly. And as a result thereof, sex to her was rather unpleasant. And here was the great sex symbol of the world who just didn't like it because it was painful to her. She didn't like it. And it was rather ironic that this girl, who when you looked at her, if you had any red blood in your veins, sex came into mind. And here was a girl who just couldn't stand it. Nobody would believe this unless they knew her. So of course, being a girl who had no money, posing naked for the cow and all that stuff, of course she learned how to satisfy men without actually having to go through the whole sex act. This whole story, we published a book last year called The Symbol, a novel which was more or less based on Marilyn Monroe. We shouldn't have published it. This is a story of why a publisher should know his stuff ahead of time. It was a very good book, but the only way that book could have been sold, really, was to advertise it the way Bernie Geist books are advertised, the sensational advertising. And when the ads were prepared, I wouldn't let them run. I wouldn't let Random House name be on these advertisements. And without them, the book couldn't do. We did sell it for a very big sum to paperback, so everybody came out of it well. But I've always been a little ashamed of myself because I use this as a moral. Don't publish a book that you don't feel proud of and that you're willing to back to the hilt. I thought this was a good book, but I didn't think it was quite a Random House book. And the ads, I simply, The Symbol.
But do you think ads do sell a book?
A kind of a book, yes. I think the advertising and exploitation of Valley of the Dolls is what gave it its great start. The same thing was true with this filthy exhibitionist, which isn't selling as well as they hoped it would, I'm delighted to say. But,